Hello, and welcome to the Culture Track at the third annual Python Web Conference. I'm Laura from 6 Feet Up, and I'm thrilled to welcome Adrienne as our next presenter.
I'm super excited to be here talking to you about making process work for your dev team. It's really great to be at Python Web Conf again for the second year in a row. This is such a great, high quality conference. There's so much great content, amazing speakers, and I'm honored that you chose my track for this session because you have so many great options. So I'm Adrienne, nice to meet you. I've put some of my keywords here for ways that you might have heard my name in the past. I'm a lead dev author and featured contributor. I'm an engineering director. I've given lots of talks at different conferences, Python keynotes, PHP, chaos, resilience, all of the things. So you may have heard of me from one of these, and my multidisciplinary interests are woven into this talk, as you will see. So my goal today is to share some advice on how to make process work for your dev team. And I'm going to do that by focusing on answering this question: what makes a good process? There are three aspects of a good process that I want to explore with you today. I believe a good process is created for and by the people who use it. I believe a good process is documented and changeable. And a good process has reflection and evaluation built into it. And so we're going to step through each of these with some concrete examples that you can take back to your teams, because I believe in practical, actionable advice. But before we do that, as you may have guessed from the teaser for my talk, I want to start by addressing some of the negative attitudes I've encountered about process in my years of working as a developer and managing software teams. It's likely that you've heard some of these negative things before, things like, I hate process, or I'm afraid of process. Process makes me nervous. I'm proactively bringing this stuff up now to give you more of an idea of what might be driving these attitudes and sentiments, so that you can more quickly get to the bottom of them and address them in a healthy and productive way for your team. Because at the end of the day, people probably don't hate process. They're probably not actually afraid of process. They just hate how it's been used in the past and how it's hurt them, how it's stifled growth or their voice, how they've seen their teams fail. So let's talk about that. So when people don't trust their processes, it's often because they don't see how the process is supposed to help them. The process seems to exist for its own sake, not to make any meaningful difference in their lives or help them be more productive. And so when you're in this headspace, thinking about adopting or modifying or changing a process can become intimidating or scary, or just feel like, what's the point? So what are some of the other reasons you might be afraid of process, or might cause you to say, I hate process? Maybe you don't want to introduce a process because you personally don't want to be seen as bureaucratic or inflexible or out of fashion. You know that our industry values being fast and flexible, and you don't want to put yourself in a place where you feel like you're pitting people against each other, or crushing innovation by making bright people adhere to a strict process. Or maybe you're afraid of process because you've worked in organizations where slow or inflexible processes emerged from disorganization and out of touch leadership. And that experience has totally left a bad taste in your mouth. Or maybe you're afraid of process because you've been subject to bad process. You've had to follow a process that was created without your input, without your buy-in, that was never documented. It couldn't be changed, and it wasn't subject to any revision or reevaluation. It was just kind of a shut up and do it attitude. And that didn't make you feel good either. So people who have worked on teams with these kinds of slow and flexible and bloated processes that lead to poor communication and low morale are likely to say that they hate process. On these kinds of teams, process is scapegoated or blamed as the problem, when in reality, any hope of functional process is undermined by other big issues on the team. Issues like these: micromanagement, a feeling of pervasive fear and threat, bullying, failure that leads to blame rather than inquiry, poor inter-team dynamics, favoritism from management, among other types of dysfunction. In these situations, process is scapegoated or blamed as the problem, when in reality, any hope of functional process is completely undermined by this list of bullies. Healthy processes rarely emerge from toxic environments that feature these kinds of behaviors or this kind of environment. So when you hear someone say that they hate process, consider that they might not hate process itself. They just hate the way it's been applied on teams that they've been a part of. Again, they hate the way they've suffered. They hate what they've seen as waste, wasted time, wasted communication, wasted cycles, missed deliveries, all kinds of disappointments. And remember, process is an easy target. It's so easy to blame the process. It's even a little intellectually lazy. How many times have you heard somebody ask in retro, if only our process had been better? But that kind of misses the point. It's very hard for a healthy process to emerge from a toxic and dysfunctional environment. So it's really important for us to be aware that these kinds of attitudes are out there, so that when we encounter people say things like, I hate process, or I'm afraid to try this, we can get to the bottom of what's really going on. We can invite them to talk and share their concerns, and hopefully create something together and be part of the beginning of creating a whole new attitude about how we can use processes on our team. So when you hear someone say they hate process, care about them, get curious, and find out where their pain lies. Because on healthy teams, we don't have to fear process or hate it. It doesn't have to be that way. Process on your team doesn't have to be bloated or bureaucratic, as you're going to hear today. It doesn't have to be imperious or inflexible. It doesn't have to trap you. You can and should create, maintain, and modify processes that have buy-in and work for everybody. And the best way to do that is by asking the people closest to the work what's working for them and where they need change. When processes are created and maintained by the people who use them, they have more trust and adoption. In other words, because you have a stake in creating and maintaining the process, you're more likely to support it or find it useful to you. You can make it work for you. So the first aspect of a good process is that it's created for and by the people who use it. And the process can be specific to your team, but when it's grounded in your larger organization's shared goals and values, it'll make sense to other teams too, even if it's kind of bespoke to just your team. So here I want an analogy from practitioners of resilience and safety in complex systems. In their book, Behind Human Error, authors including David Woods and Nadine Sarter put people working on teams into two categories. One is called the blunt or dull end, and the other is called the sharp end. Stay tuned to see where you fall. At the sharp end, we have the practitioners, those people doing the work, or as the authors put it, directly interacting with the hazardous process. Software sure sounds like that sometimes, doesn't it? At the dull end, we have folks who control the resources and constraints. So when you see sharp end, think developers, designers, DevOps engineers, the people closest to the work doing the work. And when you see blunt end, think managers, VPs, executives, people like me. The sharp end do so much more, though, than just routinely follow rules and processes. Think about it. As the people interacting directly with the hazardous process, our developers, DevOps engineers, testers, and designers do all of the things that these authors mention. They resolve conflicts, they anticipate hazards, they accommodate variation and change, cope with surprise, work around obstacles, close gaps between plans and real situations, and they detect and recover from miscommunications and misassessments. And they do these things even when they're not necessarily part of their job description. Sound like you? Our folks on the sharp end are best equipped to tell us what is and isn't working in our process and suggest changes and improvements. Possibly the sharp end are already working around certain processes or lack thereof in order to get their work done and be effective. Inviting them to be co-creators of the process just makes sense. And this is a question I ask when I give this talk to roomfuls of managers. I mentioned that I'm a lead dev author and contributor, so I'm often talking to executives and VPs about how they can be better leaders. And I challenge them by saying, it's not enough to just know that good processes are created and maintained for and by the people who will use them. That's table stakes. But you have to actually listen to what your sharp end is telling you about how things are and aren't working for them and take action accordingly. And if you're not doing that, why not? They are the most well-positioned to tell you how to make things better. And if you're not engaging with their feedback in any form, you're simply not doing your job, Mr. Manager. But while I am very hard on managers and hold them to a very high standard, I'm not putting fixing process all on them. Process belongs to everyone and it's for everyone. A process might seem to be owned by one person, as in the example of an Agile ceremony that always gets run by one person or one manager, but that process does not belong to them. Let me say that again, because I know it can get confusing. Just because the same person runs a process doesn't mean that they own it. That process belongs to all of us because it's for all of us. And that means that we're all responsible for making it better. So we got to give feedback. We have to say, this isn't working because. Please don't wait for a savior or agile coach to fix your processes. No one's more of an expert than the folks doing the process. The managers and the leaders and the people who are entrusted with managing the ceremonies need your feedback in order to make it better. And you can be an agent for change by tying your argument to a goal, a business value, or an outcome. That's how I've found success in the past. Always tie it to how you're going to make a psychologically safe team that ships the right thing faster. They love to hear that. Connect it with a core value for your org. If your org has a list of core values that they stand by, say, I need to change this process because our current process is out of alignment with our value of X. That can be very compelling when you're telling that story upward. Don't be afraid to speak up in one-on-ones with your manager. If your manager is not an advocate, skip above to their manager. Have a skip level meeting. Use your team retrospectives if your team does Agile retrospectives. If your team doesn't, and you don't really follow a flavor of Agile, consider the philosophy and practice of retrospectives, of infrequently getting together with your team and talking about how things are going. That can be a great time to service these concerns. Find others who think like you, share similar concerns, and work on a plan together. Above all, just don't abdicate your own power. Remember that the process is here to serve you, not the other way around. If your team's following a process just because that's how it's always been done, take a step back. Examine your goals. Is the process still helping you meet them? Is it facilitating your success, your team's success, your company's success? If yes, great. If no, revisit, rework, change. That word change helps us transition into the second aspect of a good process. A good process is documented and changeable. I want to start with documentation because frankly, I'm feeling a little nostalgic for a time when we could all travel. So I'm going to shout out to my Write the Docs crew. Here we are in Europe, in Prague in 2016. We're about to put on the Write the Docs conference that happens every fall, or was pre-COVID. Here with Eric Holscher, co-founder of Read the Docs, Mikey Ariel of Red Hat, Sam Wright, Lucy Day, formerly of Django Girls. Documentation and technical writing is something that's long been important to me. And if it's something that you care about too, I definitely encourage you to check out the Write the Docs community at writethedocs.org from the people who brought you Read the Docs. They have one of the best technical newsletters like I've ever received. Like it is full of great content. So check it out, sign up if you haven't. But software and process both create artifacts of our work together. An artifact of software is code, an artifact of process is documentation. So we can build in both change tolerance and inclusion by taking the time to document our processes. Documenting our process, what does that mean? It means writing down how we want to work together in the interest of some of my core values: consistency, transparency, and visibility. We don't have to write long or overly formal documents. We just need to create useful guiding artifacts that reflect our goals and values that we can look at when it's time to reflect and change. Documenting our processes means doing things like this: taking time to write onboarding guides, PR templates, SLAs, contribution guides. It means making it clear how to contribute to our work, what steps you need to take, how to file an issue, how to get help. Taking the time to write these artifacts helps us, but the impact is felt beyond our team because the documents are going to get shared beyond our team. Documenting our processes makes our work more accessible to folks outside of our team. When we do these types of things, when we write our SLAs, when we leave a comment on a ticket to help our future self or a future colleague, we are writing documentation. And when we write documentation, we make it easier for others to join us. We help our future selves. We help our colleagues. We help people who are new to our team. We help those onlookers on other teams who don't have it together like our team does. And we give them, artifacts to look at and say, hey, why is their team doing so well? They got any docs? Have they written? They got their secret sauce written down anywhere? We can really be an agent for change by writing our documentation and not being afraid to evangelize it. Now, this work takes time and effort, of course. Of course. But the investment of that time and effort yields major gains in our alignment as a team and an organization. Personally, I think it's completely worth it. Next up, the second part of that phrase. A good process is documented and changeable. We talked about documentation. Let's talk about change. A good process isn't just documented, but it's changeable. As engineers and technologists, we understand the importance of building change tolerance into our software because fundamentally, we understand and expect our software to change. In his article on design, Quality with a Name, Jim Shore defines high-quality software architecture this way. A good software design minimizes the time required to create, modify, and maintain the software while achieving acceptable runtime performance. So minimizes that time. And in their book, Implementing Lean Software Development, classic, a book about process, Mary and Tom Poppendick add, almost everything we know about good software architecture has to do with making software easy to change. So let's apply the same principle to our process. Like software, our processes are not one and done, set it and forget it. Like input from our users, we'll receive feedback from our teams and our organization about what is and isn't working. For our processes to have continued buy-in, they must reflect the changing reality of our teams and goals. For our processes to feel relevant to us, they have to reflect the reality on the ground, okay? Because as teams grow and change, we have to examine our processes and be willing to change if they don't still work for us. If we're still trying to fit our teams and our people into a mold that hasn't worked in months or years, that doesn't reflect our goals and our values anymore, we are not going to be successful. We are going to look out of touch. We are going to look out of the loop. We are going to look unnecessarily bureaucratic. And those are not good looks. So here's a caveat as we segue to the final aspect of a good process, because there's always a caveat. Life is complex. There's no one and done. Yes, like software, processes need to be changeable. We need to build that change tolerance in. And when you're working together with your team to decide, what process would be best for you, you need to change it. You're working on changing it. You're going to disagree. Your principal engineer is going to say something. If you have a healthy environment, your newest hire, regardless of seniority, is going to come in and they're going to say, wait, that doesn't make sense to me. Your manager is going to come in with some different context and they're going to say, yeah, but you need to account for this. Your designer is going to come in and say, this makes no sense to me. Your product person is going to come in and say, okay, but you're not accounting for this part too. So yes, you're going to disagree. This disagreement is healthy and it should happen as the part of together building a process that works for your team. I support that 100%. I want you to disagree when you're deciding on how to implement. But once you all agree how you are going to change a process, please commit to actually trying your new flow before judging it. Because if you don't really commit to it, you're not going to be ready for this third and final step of reflection and evaluation. So the parts of a good process, or it's built by the people who are using it, it has change tolerance built in. And the final part that I'm queuing up is we need to be able to reflect on it and evaluate it. And quite frankly, if you're not giving it a fair shake, you don't get a seat at the table to say why it's not working. You have to try. So I'd love to see you try, disagree, but commit. You will be better positioned to say why it's not working for you. So again, you can't reflect honestly on something you haven't really tried. If you haven't given something a fair shake, you're not really qualified to judge it. So in other words, don't be this kid. This kid has decided she hates broccoli and she hasn't even tried it. She just doesn't like the way it looks. Don't treat your processes like that. Give them a fair try before you give up. If you do, you're going to be ready when it comes time to evaluate the process and reflect on it. So that leads, as I said, to the final aspect of a good process. It has reflection and evaluation built in. We have to be willing to reflect on our processes if they're ever going to get any better. Before we can change them, we have to give them a thoughtful review. So here, I think of a very common analogy for many of us in the room, the analogy of a code review or a pull request. So when somebody requests our review on our work, we don't just click into GitHub and immediately say request changes. Like we don't literally load the PR and be like, hit that button, request changes. You haven't even looked at it. But also we don't load the page and immediately say, yeah, LGTM, checks out. I hope you're not doing that. Instead, we take the time to read the PR, try it out in a test environment, leave comments, watch the video that they've provided. Does this meet requirements? We give it a thoughtful review. And we do this because while we might seem to move faster by just clicking in and saying, I know this isn't going to work, or clicking in and saying, yeah, I trust this colleague, I'm sure it's fine. That might seem to help us move faster, but by skipping the steps of actually engaging with the work, we end up with a higher rate of error and misalignment, which causes everything to move slower. So you make that investment at the front. It does take a little bit of time, but it means that steps further down the process can move faster. So our processes deserve the same kind of careful review because they're created for and by the people who use them, and reflect the changing reality on our teams and goals. We must be willing to build in time to reflect on our processes and consider how they are and aren't working for us. Letting ineffective processes continue without reflection will slow us down just as surely as integrating untested code. So talk one-on-one and talk as a team too. You can use part of your one-on-one to find out how a particular process is affecting one of your direct reports. You can use retrospectives or incident reviews to talk about how certain processes were part of the problem or solution. I also recommend scheduling time quarterly to meet and discuss as a group. As I said, if you're an individual contributor, use your one-on-one time. If you're with your manager, to talk about how things are going for you. I spend a good deal of time with one of my wonderful senior direct reports, just talking about how we need to change the customer escalation process. And that's yielded great gains. Now, to be clear, that is his agenda. That is what he wants to talk about. And as a good manager, I'm responsive to that. But it's how he wants to spend his time. And we leave that meeting with action items of how we're going to engage the team. And most recently, when I checked in with him, he was like, I'm really happy with the ways that we've diagrammed these flows, with the ways that with the ways we are talking as a team about how we're handling tickets. I've certainly felt my urgency of the support burden go down, and that's led to me being less stressed at work. So you have that power as a direct report to bring that up in your meeting with your one-on-one. And if you don't feel like you're getting the support from your manager, go above them to their manager, ask for a skip level. Healthy orgs are already proactively setting those up, but it's an option. Even if your org isn't proactively doing that, just let your manager know. Also use your sprint retrospectives. That's a great time to talk as a team about what's working and what's not working. Use time and incident reviews. I'm a big fan of no root cause. It's the process that we need to look at, not the individual. I don't want failure to lead to blame of individuals. I want us to really examine the process. So an incident review is a brilliant time to do that. And just do this early and often. So in summary, 3 principles of a good process that build in inclusion from the start. They're created for and by the people who use them. They are documented and changeable, and they have reflection and evaluation built in. I think all of these things work together. It's best if you have them all because they kind of lead into one another. But if you have to start with one, try. It's better than not trying any of it. So I hope that in this talk you've been able to think of some real life examples of attitudes that you've had about processes, maybe attitudes that you've heard. You've thought of times that you've struggled or you've seen others frustrated. And I want to end with one more real life story to help motivate you to take this back to your teams, to your work, to help you see how this fits into the big picture. Like, to answer that why question, why does this even matter? So this story is about the process of writing this talk that you have before you. I wrote this talk like I've written many others in a Google Doc, totally unfancy. I titled the document on process, and I laughed because it made me think back 10 years ago to when I was sitting in front of a word processor in a very different context on my Linux machine, writing my master's thesis, and it's behind me on the shelf somewhere. My master's thesis started out with basically the same name, on process, but in a very different context. My master's thesis was on something called process philosophy, and in the context of the seminary where I earned my degree on process theology. I went to the country and I think maybe world, definitely country's only Quaker seminary, if you know the Friends. It's a very academic degree, but also practical. I didn't take preaching. Philosophy, like process, our processes can sometimes get a bad rap for being, pie in the sky or ivory tower, out of touch, like all of those bad things I told you before, bureaucratic, inflexible, doesn't reflect the reality on the ground. And so when it's not connected to your real life and your actual experience, you don't see how it's relevant. That makes total sense to me. But one thing I love about process philosophy and process theology is that it doesn't do that. It's not pie in the sky. It's very grounded, actually. It's based on the premise that reality itself is dynamic, that we as humans experience our world and ourselves as continuously changing. I'm a different person than I was a few moments ago before I said these words to you. We are different because we are creating something together that has never been done before. Process philosophy points to the processive nature of being or existence, or how we're always changing and growing. In process philosophy, process is not a dirty word, nor is it something to fear or minimize. Instead, process is something to embrace, because it's reality. I don't know about you, but in a time when so much seems scary and overwhelming, and we've experienced so much loss and pain, focusing and reflecting on my actual, real, lived experience that's right in front of me makes a hell of a difference in helping me calm down and stay focused. Because if something's going bad in this moment, just need to keep pushing, because it can change. It can change moment to moment, because reality is processive. That is the nature of our being. We have a chance to take action to change things for the better, and that is so comforting. So I'd like to encourage you to do the same. Don't fight against your reality and the inevitability of change. When we create and evaluate processes on our dev teams, let's embrace that experience. Let's remember that our processes are above all by and for the people who use them. They're created by us to help us. Let's make sure that our processes are easily changeable, which coheres with reality itself, not to mention, as we said before, the principles of good software architecture. And finally, let's build in reflection on our processes so that we are routinely and intentionally asking, is this process still serving us? Because things change after all. So let's cultivate these 3 healthy attitudes about process and create supporting structures that make sense for our teams. In doing so, we will create a process that not only works for our team, but actually, in a deeply philosophical and metaphysical way, coheres with reality itself. How cool is that? So thanks so much for listening today. As I expected, I did not use all of the time, so I will be glad to use that for Q&A. I'd love to stay in touch. My handle on Twitter is Adrienne Friend, and I write about practical, people-focused leadership and engineering management at Leading with Spoons. I've been doing this for a few years, and I love to talk to people about how to make their teams better in the service of shipping the right thing faster and having a good time while we do it. So I'm going to stop my share, and I'm excited to chat with anyone who'd like to.